The sun had just begun its climb over the jagged peaks of Kandahar province, casting long shadows across the dusty valley. A gentle breeze carried the scent of sand and wild herbs, masking the tension that hung thick in the air. Sergeant Morales adjusted her helmet and checked the straps of her body armor, eyes scanning the horizon through the small rectangular window of the lead Humvee. Every mission she had ever undertaken felt significant, but there was an unspoken premonition today, a weight pressing on her chest, whispering that this would be different. Was a combat medic with the U.S. Army Rangers, known not only for her precision in patching wounds but for her ability to stay calm when chaos erupted. Growing up in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas, had been small for her age, often overlooked by her peers. She had learned early on that determination mattered more than size. At 10, she was already outrunning boys twice her age. By 17, she had taught herself to handle basic first aid and wilderness survival. Her mother often said, "You're going to take on the world one day, just promise me you'll come back." Now at 29, she wore her mother's words like armor. She was the youngest sergeant in her unit, a fact that had earned her both respect and scrutiny. She wasn't the biggest or loudest, but her efficiency, intelligence, and calm demeanor in high-pressure situations made her invaluable. Her teammates trusted her, sometimes with their lives. And today, that trust was about to be tested. The convoy of 4 Humvees rumbled over the uneven dirt road, dust curling like smoke behind them. The valley was narrow, flanked on both sides by cliffs so steep they seemed to scrape the sky. It was a route well known to locals but notorious for ambushes. The mission was supposed to be routine: deliver medical supplies and food to a small village on the other side of the valley. No combat, just relief and reassurance. But in a region where the line between friend and foe blurred, routine was a dangerous word. Glanced at the soldiers beside her. There was Corporal, a gruff man with a permanent scowl but a heart that had come to respect. Private Morales, no relation, barely 19, clutching his rifle with white-knuckled intensity. And Lieutenant Harper, their commanding officer, who had a history of reckless bravery, the kind admired but often worried about. They had all laughed in the briefing that morning, the nervous humor soldiers always found before a mission. But the laughter now felt fragile, like glass that could shatter with a single misstep. Suddenly the calm was broken by a distant crack, the sound of bullets ricocheting against stone. His hand flew to her radio. "All units, eyes up, we may have company." The convoy slowed, engines rumbling nervously. Up ahead, dust plumes indicated movement too calculated to be the wind. From the cliffs, shadows shifted. A sharp explosion erupted from the lead vehicle, throwing forward, the world spinning in a blur of fire and smoke. She hit the dashboard, dazed, ears ringing. Through the haze, screams cut across the valley. Was shouting her name and realized the Humvee's windshield had shattered, shards glinting like ice in the morning sun. Her training kicked in instantly, overriding panic. She crawled from the twisted metal and sprinted toward the nearest cover, dragging herself behind a boulder while firing shots instinctively. Her heart raced, a drumbeat of life and fear. The valley seemed alive with danger. Insurgents had emerged from hidden positions, rifles aimed and eyes cold with intent. Ducked instinctively as bullets tore through the air, whipping dust and gravel around her. Her mind raced, cataloging injuries, strategies, escape routes. In seconds she had to decide: heal, fight, survive. The 3 priorities were normally separate, but here they collided violently. She spotted Private Morales lying on the ground, blood seeping from a shoulder wound. Without hesitation, she dashed to him, pulling him into a shallow depression in the dirt. With trembling hands, she ripped off her tactical vest, tore fabric, and fashioned a tourniquet, murmuring, "You're going to be okay, hold on, hold on." The boy's eyes were wide with fear, but he clung to her words like a lifeline. She glanced up. The enemy was closing in, and Lieutenant Harper lay unmoving behind a smashed Humvee. His chest tightened. Every mission she had prepared for seemed inconsequential compared to this moment. Her hands shook as she loaded another magazine into her rifle, scanning the cliffs for movement. Shadows shifted, and she realized the enemy had cut off their exit. Retreat was no longer an option. Survival meant facing the impossible head-on. The wind carried a scent she would never forget, the acrid tang of gunpowder mixed with dust, sweat, and the faint, metallic sharpness of blood. Time slowed as bullets whipped past her, each one a heartbeat that could end the mission or her life. His mind flicked to her mother's words again, a mantra that steadied her. "Come back." Suddenly called out. "We're pinned, we can't hold this position," nodded silently. She had already noticed the pattern of the ambush. The enemy was coordinating, using the cliffs to their advantage, isolating them. Their numbers were larger than expected, well-trained and merciless. Yet in that chaos, a spark ignited in her, clarity amid the storm. She wasn't just a medic here. She was the leader now, and she had to act decisively. Grabbed a rifle from a fallen comrade and returned fire. Her movements were precise, calculated. She shouted orders, guiding her team to cover, pushing them forward when fear threatened to paralyze them. Every decision balanced between life and death. She felt an unfamiliar thrill, a mix of fear, adrenaline, and sheer determination. Her body moved on instinct, training, and something deeper, an unyielding will to survive, and to save the people who trusted her with theirs. Minutes stretched like hours as the ambush raged. Moved from one piece of cover to another, pulling the wounded with her, firing when necessary, scanning constantly. She realized that in this valley, courage alone would not save them. It would be her mind, her skill, and her unwillingness to surrender that mattered. Every second counted. Every heartbeat could be the difference between life and death. And then, amid the smoke and gunfire, a horrifying thought struck her. Lieutenant Harper hadn't moved. She ran to him, kneeling beside his motionless body, checking for a pulse. Her hands trembled, but she stayed focused. No time for grief. Decisions had to be made. She had become the squad's anchor, the one they relied upon not just to patch wounds, but to lead. His eyes met those of Private Morales, wide with fear but trusting. "Stay with me," she said firmly. "We're getting out of this." Her voice was steady, though inside her mind raced. The valley had become a cage, bullets a constant threat, and the enemy relentless. Yet she refused to falter. Not now, not ever. The sun climbed higher, burning through the smoke and shadows. Morales, small but unyielding, hardened by every hardship she had endured in life, understood one undeniable truth: this mission would define her. Survival was no longer an abstract concept. It was immediate, violent, and personal, and she was ready. The ambush had begun, but Sergeant Morales was far from finished. The valley seemed to pulse with danger, every shadow a potential threat. Pressed her back against the jagged rocks, heart hammering in rhythm with the distant gunfire. Smoke hung heavy in the air, stinging her eyes, masking the movement of both her team and the enemy. The ambush had caught them completely off guard, and in moments their routine mission had become a fight for survival. Bullets whipped past like angry hornets, ricocheting off the cliffs with a metallic roar that made her ears ring. She adjusted her grip on the rifle, squinting through the haze. Private Morales groaned beside her, clutching his bleeding shoulder, tore a strip of cloth from her uniform, knotting it tightly around his wound. "Stay with me," she ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We move in 3. The boy nodded, eyes wide, and pressed himself against the dust-covered rocks. She glanced around. Corporal had already taken cover behind a mangled Humvee, returning fire with precision. They weren't just soldiers today. They were survivors, and their lives depended on split-second decisions. From above, the enemy fired relentlessly. Snipers perched on cliffs picked off anyone exposed, while insurgents in the valley moved with terrifying coordination. The attack was no accident. It was planned, executed with cold calculation. Instincts screamed at her. Retreating down the road was impossible. Advancing without strategy meant certain death. She needed to reorganize her team, reclaim the initiative, and buy time for the wounded. "Cover the left flank," she shouted. Her voice cut through the chaos, commanding attention. He nodded, pivoting to take out a group trying to encircle them. Dragged Private Morales toward the next piece of cover, a partially destroyed wall that offered concealment but little protection. Bullets shredded the air around them. Each impact felt like a hammer against her chest. She bit her lip to keep from screaming. Fear was present, sharp and cold, but it didn't control her. She let it sharpen her senses instead. Her mind raced as she scanned the battlefield. The enemy outnumbered them at least 3-1. They had been caught in a perfect crossfire, and yet there was something exploitable, a pattern in their assault. The insurgents advanced too quickly, confident that fear had already broken the Americans, saw the opportunity and seized it. "Morales, get down and watch our six," she commanded. "I'm making a run." With a burst of adrenaline, she sprinted across the open dirt, zigzagging to avoid enemy fire. Each step felt like a lifetime. She slid behind a ruined Humvee, quickly returning fire, taking out a fighter before ducking again. Her movements were fluid, almost mechanical, a combination of training, instinct, and sheer will. She could feel her pulse in her throat, her breath ragged, but she didn't stop. From her peripheral vision, she saw take a bullet to the arm but keep firing, grimacing yet refusing to fall. Lieutenant Harper, meanwhile, had been struck down earlier, leaving a void of authority. Realized with a sinking chill that she was now the facto leader. She had to make decisions not just for herself, but for her team, decisions that would determine whether they survived this ambush. The insurgents adjusted their positions, flanking them from both sides, took a deep breath, forcing her mind into hyperfocus. She knew the terrain. The cliffs were steep but navigable. Rocks and small depressions could serve as temporary barriers. She calculated every move before executing it. Timing was everything. The wounded needed to be moved, the enemy needed to be delayed, and somehow, miraculously, they needed to survive until help arrived. She shouted instructions, each word precise, cutting through the roar of gunfire. "Morales, cover, fall back 5 meters and suppress fire. Keep moving." The team obeyed, their movements synchronized in a dance of survival. Its leadership was immediate, decisive, and ruthless. There was no room for hesitation. Hesitation meant death. The valley exploded again with fire and smoke. A sniper's bullet grazed shoulder, burning sharply, but she ignored it, pressing forward. She reached a rock formation that offered slightly better cover. Crawling behind it, she peered over the edge. 2 insurgents were advancing, moving closer to her position. Without hesitation, she raised her rifle and squeezed the trigger. Both fell simultaneously. Her pulse surged, but there was no time to dwell on the kill. The battle was far from over. Minutes stretched endlessly. Each second was a war within itself, a test of endurance, courage, and skill. Could see the valley floor littered with debris, some soldiers frozen in fear, others attempting to regroup. Smoke and sand stung their eyes, every inhalation a mixture of dust and gunpowder. Yet through it all she pressed on, moving with purpose. Every shot she took, every command she issued was calculated to give her team a fighting chance. Suddenly, a grenade landed near their position. Reacted instinctively, pushing Private Morales behind her and diving onto the ground to shield him. The explosion tore through the nearby wall, throwing rocks and dust into the air. For a moment, the world became a blur of noise, light, and chaos. When the smoke cleared, she realized how close they had come to death. Her hands shook, but her resolve hardened. This was no longer just a mission. It was a crucible, testing everything she had learned, everything she was capable of. She crawled over to who had been knocked down by shrapnel. "We can't hold here much longer," he said, gritting his teeth. Nodded. Retreating would be deadly, and advancing without a plan would be suicide. Her mind raced, searching for an opening. Then she saw it, a narrow path along the cliffs, slightly obscured by rocks, providing a chance to maneuver. "Follow me," she ordered. Carefully, methodically, she led her team across the open ground, zigzagging to avoid enemy fire. Every heartbeat felt like an eternity. A sniper's bullet grazed the ground near her boot, throwing sand into her face, but didn't flinch. She was focused, calculating, ready for whatever came next. By now, her team had begun to trust her completely. Her calm under fire, her decisiveness, and her willingness to put herself in danger had inspired them. For the first time, they were moving not just to survive but to fight back, to take control of the situation rather than being victims of it. Realized that leadership was more than rank, It was courage, presence of mind, and the ability to inspire others even in the face of impossible odds. The insurgents, sensing resistance, intensified their attack. Bullets whizzed past and explosions shook the valley, yet pressed forward, dragging Private Morales to the next cover, signaling to provide suppressive fire. Every movement, every shot was precise. She became the eye of the storm, calm amid chaos, a beacon for her teammates. As the sun climbed higher, casting the valley in harsh light, paused for a brief moment to catch her breath. Her body was exhausted, covered in dust, sweat, and blood. But there was no time for rest. She glanced at her team, their faces determined despite fear and pain. She nodded silently. They were alive, and together they would find a way out. For Morales, the valley had become a proving ground. The ambush had stripped away routine, revealing the raw reality of combat: fear, courage, instinct, and the unyielding will to survive. And in that crucible she had discovered something undeniable. She was no longer just a medic. She was a leader, a fighter, and a force to be reckoned with. The firefight raged on, the enemy relentless, but knew one truth above all. As long as she kept moving, kept fighting, kept thinking, they had a chance. And she refused to let them die here in the dust and shadows of Kandahar. The air had grown thick with smoke and dust, clinging to skin like a suffocating blanket. The valley was no longer a battlefield but a labyrinth of shadows, ruined vehicles, and shattered rocks. Her lungs burned with each breath, and her hands were slick with sweat and blood. Private Morales and Corporal struggled beside her, battered but alive, moving in a desperate rhythm dictated by commands. They had fought back with everything they had, but the enemy's reinforcements were relentless. Each second brought more gunfire, more explosions, and more bodies falling around them. Knew the terrain intimately, yet the chaos made it almost impossible to maneuver. The insurgents had adapted, using the cliffs to isolate them, cutting off every potential escape route. A sniper perched high above fired sporadically, forcing her team to hug the shadows. She had become hyper-aware of every movement, every rustle, every heartbeat. Her training told her where to move, how to act, but her instincts whispered another reality: this fight might not end with survival. A sudden explosion rocked the ground beneath them. His vision blurred from the concussion, and she was thrown to the dirt. The wind was knocked from her lungs, and for a moment she was disoriented, unable to process the world around her. When she blinked, the scene had changed. The enemy had surrounded them. Vehicles blocked the path ahead, insurgents moved from behind cover, and rifle barrels glinted in the sunlight. There was no escape. Cried out as he took a grazing shot to the arm. Grabbed him, dragging him to cover, but the enemy was too fast. She barely had time to realize it before several insurgents converged on them, knives and guns raised. Her mind raced, calculating possibilities. They were outnumbered and trapped. This was a situation she had trained for theoretically, but never in real life. Training could prepare you for combat, but it could not prepare you for the paralysis that came with being caught at gunpoint. They were surrounded. His pulse thumped in her ears, her hands numb with adrenaline. The insurgents shouted, speaking a language she barely understood. Their words were sharp, commanding, meant to instill fear. One man stepped forward, pressing the barrel of his gun against her temple. The cold metal dug into her skin, a brutal reminder of mortality. Her vision narrowed, focusing solely on the threat inches from her face. Fear surged through her, fierce and pure, but alongside it came a wave of clarity. The moment she had trained for, the scenarios drilled into her mind over years of preparation, all converged into this single instant. This was a test of courage, of mental strength, of will. Refused to let panic define her. She drew in a slow, steadying breath. Think, plan, survive. The insurgent leader sneered, clearly taking pleasure in their capture. He barked orders to the others, laughing as they bound her and her comrades with coarse rope. Struggled, but his calm, authoritative presence kept him from thrashing violently. She worked silently, noting weaknesses in their formation, mental mapping every angle and exit. She knew that every second she appeared compliant was a second to prepare for the one opportunity she had to turn the tables. Hours passed in what felt like minutes. The insurgents questioned them intermittently, alternating between threats and cruel jokes. One of them pressed a gun to his head repeatedly, laughing each time she flinched. Pain and exhaustion gnawed at her body, but she remained outwardly composed. Inside, her mind never stopped, calculating, observing, memorizing every movement, every habit, every weapon placement. Every detail could be crucial in the coming moments. Private Morales moaned softly beside her, the bandage had applied now soaked in blood. She shifted slightly, attempting to adjust him without alerting the guards. One of the insurgents noticed and smacked him sharply, warning them both to obey. His heart pounded, but she bit back the anger. Acting rashly now would be fatal. Patience was her weapon. Calm, patience, observation, and timing. The leader pressed the gun to her temple again. Felt the cold steel, felt the small tremor in her fingers as they tightened slightly around the trigger. Seconds stretched like hours. She remembered every detail of her training, how to exploit surprise, how to use leverage, how to make a split-second decision. Her mind honed in on one single truth: this was her moment. The insurgents moved to prepare a video, setting up cameras and lights, laughing cruelly. His eyes flicked around the room, noting the positions of the weapons, the angle of the exit, the distance between the soldiers. Everything had a purpose, everything was part of the equation. She shifted subtly, adjusting her wrist in the rope, loosening it incrementally. She waited, heartbeat measured against the ticking of fate. When the leader turned to issue an order, acted. Muscle memory and adrenaline surged through her. She twisted sharply, using the momentum to wrench the gun from the insurgent's hands. The metallic clang echoed, startling everyone. She fired twice, the sound deafening, and the first attacker collapsed. The second moved toward her instinctively, and she pivoted, using the same weapon to neutralize him. Chaos erupted, insurgents shouting and scrambling, bullets tearing past. And Private Morales, inspired by her sudden action, sprang into motion. Cut their bonds swiftly, handing them weapons she had grabbed from fallen attackers. The room became a whirlwind of movement. Sand, blood, smoke, and fire mixed with the screams of disoriented enemies. His mind was in hyperdrive, directing her comrades, covering angles, predicting movements. Every step she took was precise, every shot calculated. By the time the dust settled, the insurgents were either incapacitated or fleeing. Breath ragged, bloodied but unbroken, took stock of her team. They were alive. Against all odds, they had survived. Her hands shook, her pulse raced, but for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to exhale. The valley outside was quiet again, the wind carrying away the smoke, leaving only silence and the faint hum of distant helicopters. Yet even in victory, she knew the danger was far from over. They had survived the capture, but they were still deep in enemy territory, wounded and vulnerable. His mind raced again, escape routes, shelter, enemy reinforcements, and survival strategies. She realized that every decision, every movement could mean the difference between life and death. She had to lead them out alive, or they would be lost. Morales, who had been pressed to the brink of death, now understood something vital. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. And as she led her shaken but determined comrades through the ruined compound, she knew that the true battle, the fight for survival, for return, for life, had only just begun. The cold metal of the gun barrel pressed against her temple, but Morales refused to flinch. Every nerve in her body screamed in warning, yet her mind was calm, razor-sharp. She had memorized every detail of the insurgent compound during her forced confinement. The positions of the guards, the pile of weapons in the corner, the narrow hallway leading to an exit. Seconds were all she had. One tiny lapse, and she would be dead. The insurgent leader barked orders in harsh, clipped tones, laughing at what he thought was her fear. Eyes flicked to the nearest weapon, a pistol slightly loose in the leader's grip. Her body moved before her mind fully processed the sequence. She lunged forward, head-butting the barrel aside with brutal precision. The weapon discharged into the ceiling with a deafening report, shocking everyone. Heart hammering, twisted, snatched the gun and fired twice. The first insurgent crumpled. The second charged, but she was already moving. Her instincts guided her through the chaos. Hands shook with adrenaline, but her movements were fluid, almost mechanical. She ducked behind a crate, pivoted, and discharged another round, taking down the next attacker. Bullets ricocheted off the walls around her, but her focus was singular: survive and free her comrades. She ripped at the ropes binding and Private Morales, cutting them swiftly with the edge of a knife she had grabbed from the floor. The two men stared at her, shock and awe mingling with fear, as she barked orders like a seasoned leader. "Cover me, move fast, we're getting out now," shouted. Her voice was steady despite the chaos anchoring the shaken soldiers. Scrambled to obey, taking position behind a fallen pillar and providing suppressive fire. Private Morales, bleeding but determined, followed her lead, gripping a rifle too large for his small frame. Together, the three of them became a whirlwind of coordinated action, surprising even themselves with their efficiency. The compound erupted into chaos. The insurgents, previously confident, now scrambled in confusion. Could see fear flicker in their eyes. The calculated predators were suddenly prey. She moved with purpose, leading her team through narrow hallways and up crumbling staircases, using every shadow for cover. Each room held danger, yet she never hesitated. Time slowed in those moments, each decision calculated, each movement measured. One wrong step could cost them everything. As they burst into the open air of a back courtyard's heart leapt. Sunlight struck the dust in golden beams, illuminating the chaos like a battlefield painting. Enemy fighters scrambled to intercept them, shouting in alarm. Fired as she ran, each shot purposeful. She could hear the screams, the shouted commands, and the relentless whine of bullets slicing the air. Her adrenaline surged to a new peak. Fear was still present, but it was sharpened into clarity and focus. The open courtyard was treacherous. Broken walls, scattered debris, and jagged rubble made every step a potential trap. Calculated the safest path, darting from cover to cover while her team followed closely behind. She noticed the enemy regrouping at the main exit, preparing to flank them. Thinking fast, she grabbed a small crate, flung it into their path, and triggered a grenade she had hidden nearby. The explosion rocked the courtyard, throwing enemies off balance and providing the crucial seconds they needed to continue their escape. Private Morales stumbled, catching his foot on debris, lunged, grabbing his arm and yanking him upright, provided covering fire, a steady barrage that pinned down any insurgent attempting to advance. They reached the outer wall of the compound, where the terrain dropped sharply into rocky scrubland. Scanned the area, noting the cliffs and scattered boulders. The enemy would be forced to funnel down narrow paths if they pursued. Using her knowledge of terrain, she guided her team through the rough ground, moving as silently as possible, despite the chaos ringing in her ears. Behind them, the enemy regrouped, furious at the unexpected turn. Gunfire erupted once more, bullets tearing into rocks and earth around them. Returned fire with calculated precision, covering the movement of her comrades. The wind carried the acrid smell of smoke, gunpowder, and blood. Her uniform was torn, dirt and grime caked her face, and her muscles burned from exertion, yet she pushed forward. There was no time to think about pain. Only movement mattered, only survival. A final obstacle appeared, a narrow bridge over a dried riverbed just wide enough for one person at a time. Enemy fire raked across it, dangerous and relentless. Made the split-second decision to go first. She sprinted across, zigzagging to avoid bullets, heart pounding. And Private Morales followed, each step a testament to their determination and trust in her leadership. Halfway across, an insurgent stepped out, rifle raised. Reacted instantly, firing and hitting the target before he could pull the trigger. Every second counted. Hesitation would be fatal. They finally cleared the bridge and entered a small valley, hidden from the enemy's direct line of sight. Allowed herself a brief moment to exhale, but only briefly. They were not yet safe. Reinforcements could arrive at any time, and they were deep in enemy territory. She pressed forward, scanning for cover, for escape routes, for any advantage. She could hear the distant shouts and the rumble of vehicles as the enemy tried to regroup. Each sound was a reminder that their survival depended on speed, precision, and unyielding focus. As they moved, reflected briefly on the events of the last hours. The ambush, the capture, the imminent threat to their lives, all of it had honed her instincts, sharpened her courage, and revealed the depth of her determination. She realized that leadership was not about rank or medals. It was about presence of mind, quick decisions, and the willingness to act decisively when everything hung in the balance. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a low ridge that offered a temporary reprieve. From this vantage point, could see the open desert stretching ahead, dotted with rocky outcroppings that could provide cover for the journey back to friendly lines. Her team was exhausted, bleeding, and shaken, yet they were alive. And for that meant every calculated risk, every split-second decision, every ounce of courage had been worth it. The insurgents had been outmaneuvered, at least for now, but knew the battle was far from over. This victory was temporary, and survival still depended on the next moves they made. But in that moment, standing on the ridge with the wind cutting through her hair, Morales allowed herself a fleeting sense of triumph. She had the impossible. She had seized control when the odds were against her. And most importantly, she had kept her team alive. The sun rose higher, illuminating the valley below. Shadows of the enemy retreating lingered in her mind, a stark reminder that their fight was not yet finished. But's gaze was steady, her resolve unshakable. She would continue forward, guiding her team through danger, through fear, and through uncertainty. The seconds that had once threatened to end her life had instead revealed her true strength, a force of will, courage, and unbreakable resolve that would carry them through whatever came next. The ridge offered a brief moment of respite but knew better than to trust it. The valley beyond stretched wide, open, and exposed. Every step forward would be a test, a gamble against the enemy's reinforcements, the rugged terrain, and their own exhaustion. Private Morales leaned heavily on her shoulder, blood seeping through the makeshift bandages had applied. His breathing was ragged, his arm stiff from the gunshot wound, yet both men trusted her completely. Survival depended on leadership, and she couldn't falter. She scanned the terrain, noting a faint path along the rocky outcroppings that descended toward a small, dry riverbed. It would be slower, forcing them to navigate jagged stones and uneven earth, but it offered concealment. The open desert beyond was a kill zone. Moving across it would be suicidal. Mapped the route in her mind, every step a calculation of cover, speed, and angles of enemy fire. They had minutes to cross each dangerous section, seconds to react to threats. "Follow my lead," whispered, her voice firm yet calm. She moved first, testing each foothold, her body tense with anticipation. Private Morales followed, shifting their weight carefully to avoid loose rocks. The enemy was still searching, but the ridge and scattered boulders gave them cover. His ears were attuned to every sound, a distant shout, the faint rattle of a vehicle, the whine of a distant rifle. Each signal meant danger, and each step required vigilance. The first challenge came quickly. A small enemy squad emerged from the rocks ahead, flanking the path had chosen. She froze, heart hammering, eyes darting for options. Retreating was impossible, moving forward without planning meant death. Then instinct took over. She dropped low, signaling the others to do the same. She picked up a rock and hurled it against the cliffs to the right, creating a loud distraction. The squad turned instinctively, and in the confusion her comrades slipped past them, adrenaline sharpening every sense. Hours seemed to stretch like days. The sun climbed higher, beating down on their backs, turning the desert air into a suffocating furnace. Their injuries slowed them. Every step was pain, every breath a reminder of their fragility. Checked their progress constantly, scanning for threats and opportunities, adjusting the pace to keep the enemy guessing. She kept her team moving with quiet authority, alternating between urgent whispers and sharp commands when necessary. At one point, Morales faltered entirely, collapsing onto the rocky ground. Knelt beside him, assessing his wounds. The bandage on his shoulder was soaked through, and his face was pale. "You're okay," she murmured, more to keep him calm than to reassure herself. She hoisted him onto her back briefly, using sheer strength to keep moving, each step deliberate, each muscle screaming in protest. Covered their rear, firing over shoulder when small arms fire erupted from a distant ridge. As night approached, the shadows lengthened, giving them cover but complicating navigation. Knew the importance of staying quiet. Any sound could attract enemy patrols. She led them through narrow canyons, using the natural terrain to conceal their movement. Her mind never stopped calculating distances, cover spots, angles of attack, and potential threats. Every decision carried weight. A single miscalculation could cost all three of their lives. They reached a dried riverbed just as the moon rose over the horizon. It was wide, sandy, and flat, a vulnerability. Pressed her team against the bank, crouching low as she scanned the perimeter. From this vantage point, she could see shadows moving on the far side, enemy patrols attempting to track their escape. Calculated speed and cover, deciding that the only option was to sprint across in short bursts, ducking behind small outcroppings of rock to minimize exposure. "On my mark," she whispered. Her heart raced, but she remained composed. The first run was tense, bullets whipping past, sand erupting with each strike. Lead pulling Private Morales behind her while provided suppressive fire, forcing the enemy to take cover. They made it across, breathless but alive. For a fleeting moment, triumph surged, but knew better than to celebrate prematurely. As dawn approached, exhaustion became a formidable enemy. Every step was heavier, every movement slower, but determination never waned. She improvised constantly, using rocks to create noise distractions, directing her team to shift weight on uneven terrain, improvising bandages and supports to keep them moving. The desert offered no mercy, yet she used its features as an ally, blending shadows, cliffs, and natural cover to maintain their advantage. They stumbled upon a small, abandoned hut near the edge of the desert, guided them inside, barricading the door with debris and scavenged planks. It was far from safe, but it offered a chance to rest and plan. She tended to their wounds again, cleaning scratches and applying makeshift bandages. Her hands were steady despite her own fatigue. "We rest for 20 minutes, she instructed, her voice a mix of command and reassurance. "Then we move again. No hesitation." Morales shivered, exhausted, and slumped against the wall. Gaze swept the horizon through a cracked window. Movement far in the distance suggested the enemy was searching, though they hadn't spotted them yet. His mind raced, calculating the next steps, plotting routes that minimized exposure while maximizing cover. Every decision was precise, deliberate, a chess game played for survival. She knew reinforcements could come at any moment. They had to stay ahead. Hours later, they emerged from the hut under the cover of night, moving cautiously along a narrow canyon that led toward the relative safety of friendly lines. Instincts guided them. She paused frequently to listen, to scan, to ensure they weren't being tracked. The desert at night was deceptively silent, yet each sound could mean life or death. She used her knowledge of terrain, her acute senses, and her unwavering resolve to navigate the treacherous landscape. By early morning, they reached a vantage point overlooking a distant U.S. outpost. Relief surged, but forced herself to stay focused. The final leg of their journey was still perilous. The enemy could have reinforcements nearby. One misstep, one sound, one misjudgment, and all would be lost. But her team trusted her implicitly, their survival tied to her decisions. She would not let them down. Morales had done the impossible. She had led her wounded comrades through a hostile landscape, evading enemy patrols and using strategy, courage, and quick thinking to survive. But she knew the journey was not yet over. They had escaped the immediate danger of the compound, yet enemy territory still surrounded them. She pressed on, guiding them forward with unwavering determination. Each step, each breath was a testament to her skill, her courage, and her refusal to surrender. And as they crested a small ridge, seeing the first signs of the outpost in the distance, allowed herself a fleeting moment of hope. Survival was no longer just a goal. It was within reach. But the desert had taught her a harsh truth. Victory came only to those who never let fear cloud their judgment. Morales, battered but unbroken, led her team onward, ready for whatever challenges awaited them in the final stretch. The first hints of dawn painted the desert in muted golds and reds, but there was no serenity in the air. Morales crouched behind a jagged outcrop, rifle in hand, scanning the horizon with every ounce of focus. The valley ahead was a death trap, open terrain flanked by cliffs, broken earth offering minimal cover, and signs of enemy movement that hinted at reinforcements closing in. Their escape so far had been a miracle of ingenuity and grit, but knew this was the point of no return, the moment where survival demanded absolute courage. Groaned, his arm still throbbing from the gunshot wound, and Private Morales leaned heavily on shoulder. She steadied them both with a firm grip. "We make this our line," she whispered, her eyes never leaving the advancing shadows. "We hold here, no retreat." Her words were more than instruction. They were the lifeline her team clung to, the anchor in the storm of chaos surrounding them. The enemy appeared first as tiny shapes in the distance, then grew into a tide of armed men converging from both cliffs and open desert. Assessed quickly, there were more than 30, possibly 40 fighters, while her team consisted of only 3, herself and Morales. The odds were staggering, but panic had no place here. Her mind whirred, calculating angles, choke points, cover, and the potential for traps. Improvisation had carried them this far. Now, precision and audacity would decide the outcome. She took position on the highest rock, using it as both vantage point and stronghold. "Cover the left flank. Morales, keep low and watch our rear. Focus on survival and support me. We move together, coordinated, or we don't move at all." Her voice was calm, commanding, imbued with authority that cut through exhaustion and fear. Her team responded, bolstered by her composure, their trembling hands steadied by the certainty in her eyes. As the enemy advanced, picked off targets with methodical precision, each shot deliberate. She aimed for limbs first, forcing their attackers to falter, then center mass, ensuring maximum impact. Bullets tore through the morning air, echoing off the canyon walls like rolling thunder. Behind her provided suppressive fire, his once trembling arm now steady under her guidance, while Morales watched their rear, ensuring no one slipped through unnoticed. A sudden movement drew attention, a squad attempting to flank their right side through the rocky terrain. She assessed the risk instantly. Retreating would expose them entirely. Advancing without a plan meant death. Her solution was audacious. She grabbed a grenade, pulled the pin, and lobbed it precisely at the flanking group. The explosion rocked the ground, throwing dust, debris, and chaos into the enemy lines. Shouts rang out, and the insurgents stumbled, giving his team precious seconds to reposition. Time stretched endlessly. His body ached, muscles burning, lungs screaming with exertion, yet she remained hyper-aware. Every shadow, every sound, every movement was a potential threat. She coordinated her team, directing their fire and movements like a conductor guiding an orchestra through a symphony of violence. Fear was present, but she harnessed it, turning it into clarity, into strength. The enemy regrouped quickly, realizing they had underestimated the Americans. They surged forward, more aggressive this time, moving in waves. Knew that sheer firepower alone would not suffice. She needed strategy, terrain, and timing. Using the cliffside, she directed to lay suppressive fire from a higher ledge, forcing the attackers into predictable channels. Morales, despite exhaustion, handled the rear, taking careful, aimed shots to slow enemy reinforcements. Bullets zipped past, sand erupted around them, and shouts rang through the valley. His focus narrowed to a single point: survival and victory. Each move was precise, a dance of life and death. She vaulted over rocks, fired at the advancing enemy, and repositioned her team with the efficiency of a seasoned leader. Time seemed both eternal and fleeting. Each heartbeat counted as much as a minute. Each decision could save or doom them. One insurgent managed to close in, aiming directly at Morales. Reacted instantly, firing a shot that brought him down before he could pull the trigger. Morales gasped, nodding at her in awe and relief. She couldn't allow herself to feel pride. There was no room for distraction. The enemy continued to press, relentless, but coordination and ingenuity gave them the edge. She noticed a narrow ridge to the left, offering partial cover and higher ground perfect for a defensive stand. "Move now," she ordered. Using hand signals and precise commands, the team sprinted to the ridge, bullets whipping past, kicking up clouds of dust and sand. Laid down covering fire, Morales followed her lead, keeping low and alert. Reached the ridge first, crouched behind a jagged boulder and took a calculated shot at the lead insurgent. The group faltered, confusion and panic spreading through their ranks. Seizing the moment, grabbed a fallen enemy weapon and fired rapidly, picking off those who tried to regroup. Each shot was controlled, deliberate, exploiting gaps and hesitation in the enemy's formation. The insurgents were ruthless, but uncoordinated chaos is vulnerable to a steady, focused mind. Tactical brilliance turned desperation into advantage. She had become a storm, relentless and precise, directing her team's movements while striking fear into the enemy. Hours felt like minutes as the battle raged. Voice never faltered, her commands precise, her body moving with deadly grace. Every corner was accounted for, every angle covered. She exploited every weakness, using rocks, debris, and elevation to maintain the tactical upper hand. The enemy, for all their numbers, began to falter under the sustained and calculated assault. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the enemy began to retreat. Their initial confidence shattered, their coordination lost. They fled toward the cliffs and the open desert beyond. Didn't allow herself relief, not yet. She pressed forward cautiously, covering and morales as they moved through the battlefield. Bodies littered the ground, smoke and dust mingling with the scent of blood and gunpowder. When the dust finally settled, team stood victorious. She surveyed the scene, every inch of the battlefield etched into her mind, positions, bodies, cover, escape routes. They had survived an overwhelming ambush, fought against impossible odds, and emerged alive. Her body was bruised, her hands blistered, and her face smeared with dirt and sweat. Yet her eyes were sharp, clear, and resolute. "This is our line," she said, voice calm but commanding. "We hold here until extraction. Keep alert. Nothing is over until we're safe." And morales nodded, trust and awe in their eyes. They had followed her through fire, through blood, and through despair, had proven not just her skill but her unwavering resolve. As the sun climbed higher, signaling the approach of reinforcements, realized something profound. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act decisively despite it. She had faced overwhelming danger, been pressed to the edge of death, and yet emerged as a leader, protector, and symbol of resilience. Even now, she knew the fight was not truly over. They were wounded in enemy territory, and the threat of additional forces loomed. But for this moment, the battle had been won. Morales, battered but unbroken, had turned the impossible into reality. Her team survived because of her, and in that victory, a legend was quietly born. The first hint of engine noise in the distance made his heart leap. High above, the faint silhouette of a helicopter hovered, its rotors slicing the desert air with deafening force. She signaled to and Morales, whose exhaustion was visible in every tremor of their bodies. Their relief was palpable, but focus remained razor-sharp. This was not over until they were safely on board. The enemy might have retreated, but reinforcements could still be near. Every step towards safety was still a test. "Stay low and move," instructed, her voice firm but calm. Using the rocks and boulders as cover, the trio navigated toward the extraction zone. The helicopter, a lifeline hovering like a guardian, drew closer. Its searchlight cut through the desert shadows, illuminating sand and dust swirling in the morning air. The hum of its engines was a promise, but also a challenge. They had to reach it alive. His breathing was ragged, his arm still throbbing from the bullet wound. Morales's legs trembled with fatigue, his shirt soaked with sweat and blood. Adjusted their pace, alternating between brief sprints and slow, careful movements to conserve energy and avoid injury. Her own body screamed in protest. Every muscle ached, every step was agony. But the thought of surviving, of returning home, and protecting her team propelled her forward. The desert seemed endless, the extraction point a fragile beacon in the distance. Constantly scanned for threats, aware that enemy scouts could be lying in wait, drawn by the sound of gunfire from the prior battle. Every shadow, every rustle of sand could signal danger. She pressed her team forward with subtle hand signals, calculated pauses, and deliberate movements, each decision aimed at preserving life. Suddenly, the distant crack of gunfire erupted again. Enemy stragglers had regrouped, attempting one last desperate attack. Dropped low, signaling her team to take cover. She returned fire with unerring precision, each shot calculated to neutralize the threat quickly. Inspired by her focus, aimed carefully despite his wounded arm, while Morales, shaking from exertion, found steady resolve under unwavering guidance. Minutes felt like hours as they navigated the final stretch. The helicopter's arrival seemed both immediate and impossibly slow. Mind ran calculations, considering terrain, timing, and enemy positioning. She moved with purposeful efficiency, adjusting their path to avoid exposure, keeping morale high with brief words of encouragement. Her leadership transformed fear into determination, desperation into coordinated action. Finally, they reached the extraction zone. The helicopter descended low, its ramp opening like a gateway to salvation. Was first, helping Morales onto the ramp while maintaining vigilance. Followed, struggling but moving with determination. The enemy's attempts to flank them had been thwarted, and now, lifted by the roaring helicopter, they felt the first real sense of relief in hours, maybe days. Inside the helicopter, the rotor's wind whipped through their uniforms, disheveled and bloodied, tightened her grip on her rifle, scanning the terrain below. Even now, she refused to let her guard down. They were still in hostile territory, and complacency could be fatal. The pilot maneuvered skillfully, lifting them high above the desert and toward friendly territory. Finally allowed herself to exhale slowly, though her mind remained alert. As the helicopter climbed, the team shared a moment of quiet triumph. Breathing steadied, Morales slumped with exhaustion and looked out over the desert below. They had survived the ambush, the capture, and the brutal battle. Every instinct, every ounce of training, every moment of courage had carried them through. She realized that survival wasn't just about skill or luck. It was about resilience, leadership, and the unbreakable will to keep moving forward despite impossible odds. The pilot radioed in, confirming their route and relaying their status to the command post. Updated them on enemy positions, casualties, and the condition of her team. Even in the aftermath of survival, she remained thorough, ensuring that reinforcements could follow safely and that intelligence was preserved. Her professionalism never faltered, a testament to her character and experience. As they approached the U.S. outpost, relief and anticipation mixed with fatigue. Soldiers on the ground watched the helicopter's descent, ready to provide medical assistance and debrief the survivors. Guided her team down the ramp carefully, supporting Morales and helping navigate each step. Every muscle ached, every movement was painful, yet there was a quiet pride in their steps. They had survived, and now they would be safe. Medical personnel rushed to assess injuries, applying advanced treatment to the bleeding, bruised, and exhausted soldiers. Oversaw the process, ensuring her comrades received the care they needed. For the first time in hours, perhaps days, she allowed herself to acknowledge the gravity of their ordeal, the sheer magnitude of what they had survived. Her heart was still pounding, but slowly, the tension began to ease. In the debriefing room, recounted the events with clarity and precision. Every detail mattered, from tactical decisions to enemy behavior, from injuries to terrain challenges. Command officers listened intently, impressed by her leadership under extreme duress. She had guided her team through ambush, capture, escape, and a final firefight with unwavering focus and ingenuity. Her account would become a case study in courage, strategy, and battlefield leadership. After the formalities, finally allowed herself a moment to rest. She sat quietly, looking at Morales, who shared exhausted smiles. They had endured the impossible together, and that bond was unspoken but profound. Every scar, every wound, every memory of fear and adrenaline now served as a reminder of their resilience and determination. They were survivors, and they had survived together. Reflected on the mission, her mind replaying the ambush, the capture, the firefight, and the escape. She realized that her actions had not only saved lives but had also defined her in ways that words could not fully capture. Courage was tested, leadership was proven, and the human spirit had triumphed over overwhelming odds. She understood that the experience had changed her, sharpened her instincts, deepened her empathy, and reinforced her commitment to her team and mission. As the sun climbed higher, casting light over the outpost and desert beyond, felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The battlefield was behind them, the threat neutralized and the team alive. Yet she knew that every decision, every moment of courage had been necessary, that survival demanded focus, skill, and the willingness to act decisively when every second counted. She was proud, not of the violence, but of the fact that she had led, protected, and inspired her team through the unimaginable. In that moment, surrounded by the hum of the outpost and the soft chatter of medics, Morales allowed herself a rare smile. They had survived. Against impossible odds they had endured. And in doing so, they had proven that courage, resilience, and leadership could turn the impossible into reality. The desert sun was high and unforgiving, yet Morales stood tall, her uniform bloodied but her posture unbroken. The events of the past days played in her mind like a relentless storm, the ambush, the capture, the firefight, and the daring escape. Every moment had tested her to the brink of human endurance, and yet she had endured. But now, standing at the outpost, realized that survival was only one part of the story. The other part was the legacy of courage, resilience, and leadership she had created. Command officers, medics, and fellow soldiers gathered around, their expressions a mixture of awe, respect, and admiration. The official debriefings were complete, but informal recognition spread quickly through the ranks. Leadership under fire had not just saved lives, it had inspired everyone who witnessed it. The story of the soldier who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious traveled through whispers and then proud announcements, capturing the imagination of her comrades. As she watched her team recover, reflected on the bond forged in the crucible of combat, Private Morales and Corporal, once ordinary soldiers, had endured horrors alongside her and now walked with newfound strength and confidence. Their survival was a testament to teamwork, trust, and the quiet power of leadership, had guided them through death's shadow, and together they had turned fear into a weapon and desperation into victory. Back at the command center, the accolades began to arrive. Orders of commendation, medals for valor, and official recognition were prepared, each a symbol of courage under fire. Yet satisfaction did not lie in the awards themselves. She had long known that heroism was measured not by medals, but by the lives saved, the bonds strengthened, and the example set for those who would follow. She understood now more than ever that true courage inspired others to act, to endure, and to believe in their own strength. News of the operation spread beyond the military. Journalists captured the story of the soldier who had been pressed to the edge of death, whose resourcefulness and bravery had turned the tide of a deadly ambush. The tale of Morales became a symbol of hope and resilience, a real-life narrative of how determination and skill could overcome impossible odds. Letters of gratitude arrived from families of fellow soldiers, from veterans, and even from civilians touched by the account of her heroism. Ver remained humble. She credited her training, her team, and the bonds forged in combat. "It wasn't just me," she told reporters. "We survived because we trusted each other, because we stayed focused, and because we refused to give up. Every soldier out there deserves the recognition, not just me." Her words, measured and sincere, resonated deeply. Leadership, she had learned, was not about personal glory. It was about lifting others, protecting them, and guiding them through the impossible. The months that followed were a time of reflection and quiet pride. Returned to her base, where she trained new recruits, sharing her experiences and teaching lessons forged in fire and blood. She emphasized not just tactics, but resilience, adaptability, and mental toughness. She became a mentor and an inspiration, shaping soldiers who would carry forward her example of courage under extreme pressure. Each story she shared, each lesson she imparted, was infused with the memory of those perilous moments when survival hung by a thread. Her team and Morales continued to serve alongside her, their bond unbreakable. The experience had transformed them, instilling a deep respect for leadership, teamwork, and the power of decisive action. Together, they conducted missions with precision, calm, and a quiet confidence born from surviving the impossible. Its influence extended beyond the battlefield. It shaped morale, training, and the culture of resilience in the units she led. In personal moments, reflected on the fragility of life and the enduring strength of the human spirit. She thought of the soldiers they had faced, the chaos of combat, and the fine line between survival and defeat. Every scar, every memory was a lesson, a reminder that courage was tested not in comfort, but in moments of profound danger. And through it all, she understood that leadership was measured not by the absence of fear, but by the willingness to act despite it. Her legacy soon became formalized. Military historians and analysts studied the ambush, tactics, and her decisive actions in survival and combat leadership. Case studies were written, emphasizing not only her heroism but also her strategic thinking, situational awareness, and the ability to inspire her team under extreme duress. Soldiers learned that leadership in the field was as much about calm decisiveness as it was about strength or skill. Story became a teaching tool, ensuring that her example would influence future generations. Yet the most profound legacy was less formal and more personal. Soldiers she trained carried her principles into combat. Civilians who learned of her story found inspiration in resilience, and her own team remembered the trust and unity that had saved them. His name became synonymous with courage, determination, and the quiet power of steadfast leadership. She had turned a life-threatening ordeal into a lifelong lesson in bravery and hope. Years later, visited the families of those who had perished in the conflict, sharing stories of their valor and courage. She understood that heroism was not only surviving but honoring those who could not. Her presence brought comfort, her words offered solace, and her own experience reminded others that even in the darkest moments, resilience and courage could shine through. As the sun set over the horizon, stood on a quiet ridge, overlooking a landscape once filled with chaos and peril. Memories of the ambush, the firefight, the capture, and the escape were vivid, but no longer burdensome. They were part of her story, a story of survival, leadership, and unwavering courage. She had faced the unimaginable, protected her team, and emerged not only alive but stronger, wiser, and more determined to inspire others. Morales had become more than a soldier. She was a symbol, a living testament to the power of courage under fire, the importance of decisive leadership, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The legacy she left was not written in medals or commendations alone, but in the lives she saved, the minds she inspired, and the example she set for every soldier who would face impossible odds in the years to come. And as the wind whispered through the desert, knew that her story, forged in fire and tested in blood, would live on, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming danger, courage, determination, and leadership could turn the impossible into reality.